Okay, we are in Headway Upper Intermediate English, Unit 3. This is in your student's book on page 27, and we are looking at the language focus. So if you're not ready to do Headway Upper Intermediate English, and if you're not in Unit 3, then stop this video and go do something else. This is for Unit 3, student's book, page 27. Okay? Now, notice the first part says complete the chart using the verbs in brackets. Using the verb in brackets. So, here we have these little curved lines called brackets. Again, I'm American, so I call them parentheses. Same thing. Okay, so in past simple, the verb fall, in past simple, we say fell. Past perfect of hear, we say had in the past participle, so had heard. The past simple passive, for passive voice, we need the verb to be. The verb is arrest, so we say was arrested or were arrested. Now, past continuous, remember that we use the verb to be as our auxiliary both for the passive and for the continuous forms. So pay careful attention to the verb after the verb to be so that you understand which one. For the verb read, we say was or were reading. ing shows us that this is the past continuous. All right. Past perfect continuous of act, we say had been acting. For past perfect continuous, we say had, then been, which is the past participle of the verb to be, and then our verb with ing. So for act, we say had been acting. He had been acting suspicious, for example. Past perfect passive. Oh, this is a little harder. This word burgle, this means to steal. A burglar is someone who goes inside your house and steals from you. Okay, so we say had been burgled. Had been, and then past participle. Burgle is a regular verb, so had been burgled. Now, notice the question still on number 1 below the chart. It says look at tape script T3.1 on page 127. Find an example of each tense. When do we use past perfect? When do we use continuous tenses? Now, if you haven't already done this, I would suggest that you pause the video, take some time, go to page 127, look at tape script T3.1, study that audio file for a few minutes, and find those. And also think about this question: when do we use the past perfect? And also, when do we use continuous tenses? So I suggest, if you have not done that you pause the video and do it now. Okay, so let's take a look at this. First of all, the story is in past, so as is often the case, we've got lots of examples of past simple. Did he read? Went? Happened? Did he die? Survived? Jumped? Fell? Managed? Did he do? Said? Stuck? Managed? Did this happen? Was? Got trapped? Built? Hid? Happened? Started? Sent? Tried? I should have a comma there after sent. Sent, tried, broke, could. Okay, lots of verbs in past simple. Notice some of them begin with did, so those are the question form. Past simple passive. Were rescued, were worried, was trapped. Right? Okay, continuing with the same question but a few other verb forms. Past continuous, was wearing, was reading, wasn't really trying. So here we have a negative form. This word really is just an adverb describing trying. Now, past perfect simple, we have had bet, had developed, had figured. Right? Past perfect, we say had, and then the verb in past participle. past perfect simple passive. This one is a little bit less common, but it happens. Had been contacted. Contact as a verb can mean, for example, to send someone an email or to give someone a phone call. So I can say, someone gave me a phone call in past, but if I'm telling a story and I want to mention that my boss had given me a phone call the day before, I say, oh, well, he had already given me a phone call the day before. But if I want to make myself the subject of the sentence, I might use this form, the past perfect simple passive. I had been contacted the day before. Right? Past perfect continuous, we have had been talking, had been smiling, had been climbing, had been using. Again, past perfect continuous, we say had been plus the verb with ing. So let's go back to these two questions at the top. When do we use the past perfect? Well, we use the past perfect when we're talking about the past and then we want to mention something that happened at an earlier time in the past. Right? This is often useful when we're telling a story and then we want to add a detail about something that happened before, maybe the day before, the week before, the year before, etc. Okay, now when do we use continuous tenses? Well, as you know, we use continuous tenses to talk about actions in progress, things that are happening now, or things that were happening then, that day, etc. when we're telling about the past, right? Let's move on to part 2. It says, why are different tenses used in these paragraphs? Study these paragraphs for a moment. Let's look at the first one. John cooked a lovely meal. His guests had a good time. They left at midnight. Pretty simple, right? Now look at the verbs. What tense are the verbs? We have cooked, had, left. Past simple. So this is a very simple story. 3 things happen. We have 3 sentences. First, John cooked a lovely meal. Next, his guests had a good time. Then, they left at midnight. Right? So maybe John started cooking at 6 p.m. His guests arrived at 7 p.m. They hung out and talked and ate and played games and talked for a long time. They laughed. Everything was great. And then at midnight, they went home. Right? This is the idea. Simple story. Now, let's look at the second paragraph. This one is a little more complex, but I also think it's a little more interesting. Just after midnight, John was looking at the mess. His guests had just left. He'd cooked a lovely meal, and everyone had had a good time. First of all, this word of the mess, this means things are not clean. Maybe his guests came and they left plates and they left food in different parts of the house or outside the house. Things had been moved, so there are glasses and forks and knives and spoons and food out in different parts of the house. So maybe John's really tired, he'll go to bed and then clean up tomorrow morning, I don't know. But just after midnight, so maybe it's 12:05, 12:10 a.m., it's getting late at night, John was looking at the mess. Okay? So that was what was happening at that moment. His guests had just left. They had left a few minutes before. He'd cooked a lovely meal, maybe 6 hours before, for example, in the example I gave. He'd cooked a lovely meal, and everyone had had a good time. So these 3 things, notice they're not in order. They're not in order of when they happened in time, because first he cooked the meal, then his guests had a good time, then they left at midnight. But when we're talking, at least in English, we don't always think logically. We don't always start at the beginning and then move from one thing to the next in the same order that they happened in time. Okay? So this is why different tenses are useful, right? The past continuous was looking, and then these other ones, other verbs in past, past perfect to talk about things that had happened earlier, before midnight.